The Central Bank of Nigeria has announced it has lifted the Forex restrictions on the importation of 43 items. Now, this decision comes amid high levels of volatility experienced in the FX market following the unification of all trading windows into the investors and exporters, or INE window, the official FX market. The CBN said it will boost liquidity in the FX market by intervening from time to time in order to ensure Forex availability for importers. A statement signed by the CBN's Director of Corporate Communication, Dr. AbdulMumin, noted that the bank is actively working to address the existing backlog of foreign exchange transactions and is currently engaged in ongoing discussions with various stakeholders to find solutions and facilitate the clearance of the backlog. Now, the items on the list include rice, cement, margarine, palm kernel, palm and vegetable oils, tomatoes, tomato paste, and much more. Now, Victor Aluyi, Senior Vice President and Head Investment for Sankore Global Investment, joins me now. Victor, it's good to see you again. Welcome to Business Edge.
Thanks for having me.
So let's take a trip down memory lane. It's been about 8 years now that some of these Forex restrictions were introduced. CBN Governor Yemi Cardoso has now lifted them, but when Godwin Emefiele was announcing them, he said that the ban would help conserve foreign reserves and facilitate the resuscitation of domestic industries and also improve employment generation. So have we seen any of the promises that we heard from Emefiele 8 years ago manifest themselves?
Certainly not. Because if we have, we certainly wouldn't be in this FX quagmire that we find ourselves in. And I think the policy was, at the time, essentially enacted to sort of, if you will, protect our dwindling reserves in the face of really very high FX demand, at the time. You also had, instances of, malfeasance in the FX market then that, essentially led the Apex Bank to basically ban these items. But I think that at the core, that policy move at the time was to really conserve our scarce, FX resources. That was the whole idea, at the time. So whether that has succeeded really, it's very clear for us to see, because we again have been embroiled in, this whole FX, saga that we've been in for quite some time now. So these moves by, the current administration of the Apex Bank, or the current leadership of the Apex Bank, are essentially to unwind some of those policy moves that were seen at the time as not very helpful, within the FX market. So I think this is a step to, further create, a market that is driven by, demand and supply, where we would eventually get to a convergence, between that official rate and that parallel rate, which we had, for the better part of 2017 up to 2019 before COVID hit. Whether that then works, really remains to be seen. Again, the core of this really has to do with the availability of FX supply. So for me, it's really not about whether these items have been banned. So these guys, will they be able to go back into the official window and be filled with the dollar demand that they have? I think that's the critical question.
And I think that's the question I'm going to put to you and see if you have an answer for me. But let's look at something else. So the Nigerian Foreign Trade Reports of the National Bureau of Statistics from 2016 to 2022, despite the ban, it showed that Nigerians imported items such as crude palm oil, vegetable products, animal products, meat. But basically, we imported a lot of the items that were on this restricted list. And that meant we saw these products in the Nigerian markets worth about over 18 trillion naira. So I think the other part of the question is, before we get into whether or not those who are importing will be able to do it, is whether or not there really was a ban in place, or at the end of the day, this was just something that became an economic hardship on the average Nigerian. Victor, what do you think?
No, there was a ban in place. So what that basically meant was, the people that were importing these products had to resort to autonomous sources to get their FX, right? So if you're an importer and you're trying to import something, you typically will go to your bank and you fill the necessary forms. Your bank then goes to the central banks and get the dollars. But in this situation, because those items had been banned, these guys could not access the CBN window to get FX. So they had to access other autonomous windows, the parallel market and the like. So yes, they essentially still imported, but they were sourcing dollars outside of the CBN.
So now let's look at some of those items on the list. For rice, earlier this year, the Director General of the Rice Processors Association of Nigeria said that an increase in Nigeria's local rice production led to a drop in foreign rice importation from 1.2 million metric tons in 2014 to just about 438 tons in 2022. For cement, once upon a time, Nigeria imported the product in the millions of metric tons. But in January of 2022, then Governor of the Central Bank, Godwin Emefiele, said Nigeria had not spent dollars to import cement in the last 7 years. And then in May of this year, we heard that Nigeria imports an average about 150,000 tons of tomato paste concentrate annually. That's valued at about $170 million, making the country the 13th largest importer of tomato paste in the world and third largest in Africa. So the market is there. And the market is there for the items on the list. But we found that supply wasn't, and in many cases still can't meet demand. So now in adding these importers back to this investors and exporters window, the I&E window, I beg your pardon, does this move solve a problem, or does it look likely to even create more because of extra pressure?
So, I mean, it depends on what happens next. And by that, I mean what happens next, like real quickly, right? We saw a policy move in July where there was an attempt to essentially unify the exchange rates, where banks could actually put out their bids at where the parallel market was at the time at about 700 plus, from the first something that we had at the earning window, and we saw a semblant of convergence, if you will. However, the lack of supply ensured that that gap quickly reopened again, right? So this move of bringing back these guys onto the list, while it might be a move that like I said earlier, is basically geared towards ensuring that there is greater transparency in the market. In the absence of supply, it's just going to create even more problems, right? Because what you're doing is to say that these guys should come back into this market. If they cannot be served in that market, if they do not get supply in that market, they're essentially going to have to go back to these autonomous sources. So what that would basically do is to then increase the price again at these autonomous sources. I mean, there are a number of analogies that you can give about this. But what this does is that it has the potential to even weaken the naira further at the parallel markets if we don't get supply that is made quickly available to these guys as they come back into the INE window.
And it's interesting you say that because, again, we heard from Yemi Cardoso when he was speaking at his screening that the number in terms of the demands for Forex by investors and exporters backlog is around $10 billion. Now we add these people who import these 43 items to that, and we can just imagine how it will explode. But Victor, I want to talk about this in terms of how it might affect those who have grown indigenously. So earlier I did mention the executive director, I believe it was, for the rice processors, let me get that correct. Okay, the Director General of the Rice Processors Association of Nigeria. And because of this policy, we've seen an increase in rice production, almost meeting local demand. What do we think is going to happen when we're able to have these individuals who are importing these items go to the window, hopefully officially get the dollar at the official rate, and then be able to bring it back into the market? Do we not see this as something possibly being a threat to indigenous manufacturers, SMEs, and possibly the local market? What do you think?
It likely would be. However, the truth of the matter is that, again, there is the side of this policy that has to do with infrastructure investment. At the end of the day, if we have the right and necessary infrastructure that supports these industries, it will ultimately become cheaper to produce here, right? If it ultimately is cheaper to produce here, then the incentive to import essentially goes away. So in the absence of, these infrastructure that we require to make production significantly cheaper than it would be to import, then it becomes, a bit of a challenge. The reason, people really import heavily is that it's very challenging, it's very difficult to produce here because of the dearth of infrastructure that we have as a country. That gap seriously needs to be plugged. So in the absence of that, the incentive to really produce locally essentially goes away. Even with how difficult it is to get FX, people still scramble to want to import because it is simpler, it is easier, for them to bring in the goods at yourself, as opposed to, creating those local manufacturing hubs where you are essentially a country unto yourself.
So you've mentioned the unification, and I want us to look at that as we start wrapping things up. So despite this unification of all trading windows, we're still seeing high levels of volatility still persist. And there's even wider disparity between the official and the parallel market. And then, of course, that's coupled with the unprecedented depreciation of the naira. Do you think it's a bit too early to decide whether or not the unification is succeeding or failing? And also, given the fact that we saw the naira fall recently to 1,050 naira to the dollar in the black markets, and that's a depreciation, which we also saw a bit of on the official market as well, which was around 776 naira. But with this unification, are we seeing some movement to show that, okay, in the long term, we're going to get to where we need to get to?
In the immediate term, there isn't anything that suggests that that's going to happen, right? Again, I'll say that it's too pretty early to judge whether this is successful or not. I mean, it's a monetary policy move. It might take a bit of time, but I would say that, what the Apex Bank does next will prove even more crucial than what they have done now. Because what you have done is to essentially bring back demand into the area. Have you got the supply to feed them? I think that's the core question, really. If we have supply, then we're good. We're going to see, some appreciation in Naira, because at the end of the day, a lot of speculative activity has led the Naira to where it is. And unfortunately, there is incentives for speculation and individuals to carry on with their activity. But I think that if we're able to get on with supply, then we certainly will see some appreciation. In the absence of that, then it would not look good.
And I think that's my final question very quickly. What should the Apex Bank do next? They have this backlog on them. They've thrown the gates open for those on the with those importing items on the 43 items on the list. What do you expect? What do you think should happen next?
Supply. The Apex Bank just has to figure out
how,
supply.
Victor. The question at the end of the day continues to be the how of this supply. How? Where? Where's the CBN going to show us the money?
So the truth of the matter is that in 2017, we essentially just tapped the international capital markets, right? We raised some monies and we basically just papered over the issue. Unfortunately, you're able to do that today. The conditions in the ICM are significantly different from what you have today. So it becomes, a significant problem. A low-hanging fruit, of course, will be for us to really ramp up our crude oil production, deal with the oil theft. I mean, crude oil prices have been on the ascendancy for the better part of the last 2 years, right? We're seeing crude oil at almost $90 a barrel. If we can ramp up production, we'll see very good accretion to our reserves. So these are things that can be done. In the interim, maybe some sort of bilateral, loan might be able to help to assuage or solve this problem. Because the truth of the matter is that this FX situation strikes at the heart of everything that goes on in our economy, from diesel prices to fuel prices to manufacturing to production and to inflation. So it strikes at the heart of everything. If we can really get a handle on this FX situation, everything else would largely take care of themselves.
All right, and we hope that is the case, and hopefully in the coming weeks and months, we'll see that start to bear fruits. Victor Aluyi, Senior Vice President and Head Investment for Sankore Global Investment, thank you as always for joining me.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, so we'll keep watching things play out. So the CBN has said it is removing the Forex restrictions on 43 items. I know that's good news for importers of those items. Might not be such good news for indigenous businessmen and women who have started to try to fill the gap. But in the long run, competition and bigger production are things that will help the Nigerian economy and the Nigerian people. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also go to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and download our mobile app on Play Store and App Store. Till next time, I'm Tolulope, Adeleru-Balogun at 12 p.m. West African time. You have News Central Now coming your way. Stay with us.